Hey YouTube, Bob here. Got the original Nintendo Game Boy released in 1989, and it's big and bulky and takes 4 AA batteries, and it doesn't have that great of a screen. And Nintendo knew this when they released it, but they typically do that. They use older technology to make their games on because, number one, it's cheaper off the bat. They can sell their product at a cheaper price than their competitors. And if the games are good, most people won't know that. And that's a philosophy they've operated on for several of their system releases, both console and handheld. The other good thing about using outdated technology on one of your new systems is that you can introduce re-releases where the technology has been improved, the design can be smaller, the screen can be better, and all those types of things. We've seen that recently with the Nintendo DS. I'm sure we'll see it with the 3DS. And way back in 1989, 1995, we were seeing the same thing. So this is the original Game Boy. And I believe around 1996, 1997, somewhere in there, Nintendo released the first hardware revision. And I'm not talking colors. There were color Game Boys that were released prior to that. But aside from a different color on the shell, there were other hardware iterations, and the first of which I believe was in 1996, and that was the Game Boy Pocket. The Game Boy Pocket, as you can see, is quite a bit smaller than the original Game Boy, and the screen was improved immensely. It was crisper, it was clearer, and things wouldn't blur as your character moved and the screen scrolled. So all in all, it was a better design. It also used fewer batteries. You can see in the original Game Boy, as I said before, it took 4 AA batteries. Now granted, given that the screen was not color and it was not very high tech, it took a while to drain these 4 AA batteries. The same went with the Game Boy Pocket. Although it took only 2 AA batteries, AAA batteries, took 2 AAA batteries, the power consumption was reduced greatly, and you maintained the long battery life that you enjoyed with the Game Boy product. In 1998, Nintendo, in Japan at least, addressed a problem that really we've taken for granted in recent years with color backlit LCD displays, and that is being able to play games at night or games in the dark. And in 1998 in Japan, they released the Game Boy Light. And that's not to be confused with the DS Lite, L-I-T-E. This is the Game Boy Light, L-I-G-H-T. And it's titled that because it has a backlight. It used a technology called electroluminescence, which you may have seen in wristwatches, also known as Indiglo. That's the brand name of it. And what it does is if you turn the switch on, it's got the switch in just about the same place as the Game Boy Pocket, but it has 2 settings. There's on, which turns the game on, and there's one more setting that turns on the green backlight, so you can play the game at night, or in the dark, or wherever you want to play with limited light. There's a few differences between the Game Boy Light and the Game Boy Pocket, as you can see. The Game Boy Light is a little bit bigger than the Game Boy Pocket. It's a little bit thicker, and that's because instead of 2 AAA batteries like the Game Boy Pocket uses, the Game Boy Light uses 2 AA batteries. So the power consumption was upped a little bit there, no doubt to accommodate the backlighting. Additionally, as kind of a side note, I've used this with headphones, and when you turn on the system, the games sound like normal, and especially when you're listening through headphones, you turn on the backlight, there's a slight humming that you can hear, which is the light being turned on, I believe, and you can hear, I guess, what would be the additional power consumption that's being used. So it affects the audio in a very minor way, but you can hear a little bit that something else in addition is going on with the electronics of the system when the light is turned on. So all in all, it's very similar to the Game Boy Pocket. I have the silver one. This was also released in Japan in a gold color, and there were some other limited edition colors. I believe there was a Pokemon Yellow. But they're very similar. They both have a power light. A minor variation in design is the A and B titles for the buttons are printed on the Game Boy Pocket, while they're embossed into the plastic of the buttons on the Game Boy Light. Same is true for the select and start buttons. It's printed on the case with the Game Boy Pocket, and it's embossed into the plastic in the Game Boy Light. Additionally, the Nintendo logo is embossed into the plastic. It's raised in the Game Boy Pocket, and it's impressed, or it's kind of etched into the plastic on the Game Boy Light. Something else that I noticed recently is that although the Game Boy Light was never released in the United States, it looks like they may have had plans to do so because of this outline that you see here on the battery cover. That was to accommodate a sticker, which obviously there is no sticker on this one, but on the United States release of the Game Boy Pocket, you can see the sticker for the Nintendo World Class Service Center that matches the dimensions perfectly. So probably was maybe in the cards to have a US or European release of the Game Boy Light, but maybe due to poor sales or the advent of the Game Boy Color that would come out the same year, I believe. I think the Game Boy Color was released in 1998. They did not do an international release for the Game Boy Light. But I like the Game Boy Light. I think it's great. I enjoy the bigger dimensions, actually, which I know is a selling point of the Game Boy Pocket. Smaller systems were better, but I never liked this design. It almost seems unfinished to me. And the Game Boy Light has a similar design, but it's bigger, and it's more comfortable to hold, in my opinion. And I do enjoy the backlit screen, which looks great in the dark, which is what I'm going to show you now.